Hey, what's up, family, and welcome to We've Got Issues. We are coming to you again with some interesting discussions from our group text thread, as we normally do, where we're sharing all kinds of ideas and thoughts about what's happening in our personal lives or in the world that we think might be relevant to you. And as usual, my name is Nick Cates, coming to you from LA, and I've got my good friends Darren Gray, also in LA, and Ron Evans, who's all the way back there on the East Coast in Northern Virginia. So we're not going to mess around. We're going to get right to it. You know what to, if you watch our channel, you know what to expect. We try and get into a different topic each week that we think will be applicable. And we'd love for you to like and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss our discussions, and also to give us a big thumbs up because it helps us to reach more people. So today I have the distinct honor of being able to present the subject for this week. And my quote for the week is, or my little phrase of the week is going to be, what is my phrase? I almost forgot it.
How to have a senior moment.
that should be it. That should be it. I was so busy doing my intro that I forgot my phrase of the week. My phrase of the week is, that's right, the sincerest form of flattery. And I want to be careful here because I'm going to get into something that could be construed as like a racial thing or maybe hatred of another group, but it really isn't that. What I want to talk about this week has to do with a clip that I'm going to put in the show notes, but I'm going to run it here, and this will give you an idea about the basis on which I'm going to come to this topic. So I'm going to share my screen, and we're going to get into it right now. Okay, here we go.
Why are Jewish people so wealthy? 8 things I learned from my Jewish clients that transformed the way I thought about money. Here's the first one. Number 1, they prioritized generational wealth and avoided single generation consumption. They saw money as a tool to empower the next generation, not to just fund their own lifestyle. Number 2, they gave assets, not appliances. You see, when I got married, I got toasters and china, and I didn't even have a china cabinet. But several Jewish clients of mine told me, they said, in our families, we give cash or stocks. In other words, they gifted wealth to their loved ones, not stuff. Things that appreciate, not depreciate. Number 3, they expected to be wealthy and were embarrassed by it if they weren't. See, I grew up where struggle was normal and wealth was rare. But in the Jewish American culture, financial success was normal and struggle was rare. There was a pride in building wealth and a shame in mismanaging it. Number 4, they used their pain as fuel, not an excuse. Jewish people have faced horrific oppression, but instead of being paralyzed by the past, they use their pain as fuel for success.
So, the sincerest form of flattery. That is my phrase of the week. And what I'm trying to get into here, with that video really brought up in my mind, is the real connection between African Americans and Jewish Americans or Jewish people around the world, right? We share a common past where we are the victims of very serious discrimination and oftentimes genocide, right? There's no better modern example of genocide than what happened during World War II with the Jewish genocide, or the Israeli or Jewish genocide in Europe, and obviously we have slavery and all the wretched things that happened with slavery here in America. The thing that I want to put out to you guys is, because it's a real issue of my heart, about that last point that the brother made, that they use the Jewish people. And again, it's a bit reductive, right? He's talking about his personal experience and what he observed about Jewish culture and Jewish people that he was aligned with. And I don't think it's unreasonable to say that oftentimes, Jewish people, particularly in America, but around the world, have excelled in many ways, in whether it's in finance, whether it's in business, whether it's in, even in the arts and culture. Like, Jews have really taken the point that they came into since World War II, and has as a group on average done really well, whether it's in the sciences, anywhere where you can look, in the media, anywhere where you can look, there are Jewish people at the highest reaches of that, and not just as maybe individual examples like Oprah, but like as on a level where there are at mass, at scale, a lot of Jewish people, despite the fact that they came from this really tragic thing. And I am, in my sincerest form of flattery, looking at how does one look at that where they are today as our community, and figure out like ways that we can mimic that. Think of all the points that the brother brought up about how they look at wealth, how they look at investing, how they look at just the paradigm. And again, I don't want to be over reductive about it. This is not a critique in any way. It's an observation. And I'm not the first one to pose this question. There are people who pose this question from a antagonistic standpoint, who to feel like the Jews are somehow the cause of problems. We see where the far extension of where that can go. But even today, there are people like with the whole replacement theory and like all these different things and so forth. But despite all of that, they have done remarkably well, and they're certainly not alone. There are other groups, whether it be Asian groups or it be other groups that have really done this. And we have these examples to look at. And I don't think there's anything wrong or special or unique about African Americans that have caused us not to excel beyond some of the injustices that have been done. So I just want to start with that as an overview and just put out to you guys to see what your observations are, even your thought about this as a subject for discussion. Who wants to take it first? Aaron, you go.
I'll go. So a quick story before I get into my thoughts on it. I shared with you guys when we were off screen about my daughter going to a private school, and it was a private school on the west side of Southern California, Los Angeles. Wasn't in Los Angeles. And I was one of the folks that was paying tuition, and most of the other kids of color were there on scholarship. And so I would get invited to essentially the cool kids club with the parents. And so the scholarship kids weren't invited to that. And I remember when my daughter was in 8th grade, talking to a dad, because my daughter would go to the bat mitzvahs and the bar mitzvahs and everything like that. She had a lot of Jewish friends. And I was telling him how I wasn't sure if my daughter was going to go to high school because she wasn't taking advantage of all that the school had to offer. And he said something like, "Oh, don't worry about it. It'll be fine. She'll get it together. My daughter's very similar. She'll get it together. It always works out that way. It worked out for me. It worked out for, he was just going on and on and on about how it's always worked out." And I walked away from that thinking that he had an entire community and culture and schooling separate from what was going on at the school and in society at large. There was an entire community of support that would help his daughter get on the right track, because they had their cultural connections, and they weren't necessarily Orthodox, but they had their synagogue, they had their school, they had their community, they had their family. There was a warm embrace of the entire family that allowed for the girl to, be out there expressing her opinions, but they were not even concerned about her eventually getting it and then taking advantage of it all. And so, and the same thing with students, when I used to have Korean students that would end up at my alternative school, the parents were not concerned because they're just going through a phase. But we have an entire community. We have our own schooling on Saturdays. There's this wraparound that they had that would enable them to do those things like generational wealth. There was an other education and indoctrination that was happening outside of the education system and outside of the nuclear family that our community doesn't seem to have anymore. Going back to, integration, and going back to, when our community started to move into the larger mainstream community, we lost a lot of that. We lost our schools, we lost our community, we lost our cultural icons, we lost our ability to tell our own story, as they're cutting out DEI and everything across. we shouldn't be relying on the schools to tell the history, Black History Month. We should be telling our kids that on our own every day. So I think before we get to those generational wealth and giving wealth assets, there needs to be something in our community and our culture that has to happen first.
I like that.
This is a deeply personal topic. And one of the things that I do, right, every year, our daughters would start their next year of college, the first year from freshman through senior year. I would get a book that was one of my favorite books, and I would write something in there, personal note from father to daughter, about why this book was important to me. And for both of our daughters, I have sent them a copy, and the book is called The Triple Package: How Three Unlikely Traits, and I forgot what the rest of the subtitle is, but it's basically how three unlikely traits help some cultures succeed and others not. And Nick, your video speaks to it so much that I just have to ask, have you read The Triple Package, or have you heard of that book?
I haven't heard of it. No,
Oh.
I haven't heard of that.
Okay.
That is something to put on the reading list.
Oh yeah, no, it is totally in your wheelhouse. And you touched on one of it. There's three reasons why some cultures, and you touched on the Jewish culture, you touched on the Asian culture. You did not touch on the African culture. And another is Jamaican, where it's people, and those two cultures are of color. But we know that when Africans come to the United States, they are unburdened by slavery and a feeling of inferiority, and they're able to succeed. And the book posits there are three reasons why some cultures, like you mentioned, the Jewish culture, Asian culture, African culture, Iranian culture, Persian culture, succeed. The first one is a superiority complex. Now, you think about the Jews. The Jews were forbidden to own land back in medieval times. So all they were allowed to do was be bankers. And they were money changers, and they were very good at it. And then that moved on from there into jewelry and other things. So superiority culture, we will overcome this. If you look at the Asian cultures, we've been around for 5,000 years, yo. You've been around for 200, okay? So there are cultures that feel superiority complexes, and that's something that you need to have. Another one is you also have to combine the superiority culture with a feeling of insecurity. So why am I being persecuted all the time because I'm Jewish? Why aren't I treated fairly because I'm Asian or I'm African? Okay, so I feel like I got to work a little harder to get my respect that I deserve. So there's insecurity there. And then the third trait, and the one that I would say is most damning of Black culture in this country, is they have impulse control. And the video talks about impulse control when it talks about, I ain't trying to buy stuff. I'm trying to pass on wealth. Okay, passing on wealth. And there's a phrase we use in our house: you cannot buy your way to wealth. Okay, you can't buy trinkets and become wealthy. And impulse control is something that cultures, they talk about at the dinner table. They have small businesses, they invest their money, they go into professions where it's a long journey to get to that profession. But once you're there, you're rolling. It's a lack of immediate gratification and the grit that's required to defer. I'm not going to buy the 911 when I can afford it when I'm in my 20s and have a high lease note.
Right.
I'm going to wait until I can afford to buy the thing and buy the thing. And that may take 30 years, but I'm going to wait until I can get it right. Mm-hmm. And the lack of impulse control in our community is something, it's the third trait. The cultures that thrive have these three traits. Cultures that don't suffer.
That's interesting. There's I think I don't know if I mentioned it yet on this show, but there's the documentary from Ken Burns about the Holocaust and the U.S. role in the Holocaust in terms of not helping, and I'm going to put that clip in the show notes, a clip of Ken Burns and the other producer talking about it. It'll be in the show notes. Well worth a watch. The reason why I bring that up is that there's another point that seems to me that is functional in your analysis, Ron, and it's probably just folded into what you already said. And that's that oftentimes, particularly Jewish people who have come to America, came because they were, one, fleeing persecution where they were from. And in many ways, they were fleeing persecution where they had amassed they had been very successful where they were. They had all kinds of, whether it was businesses or they had, valuable treasures or whatever it was they had to abandon those things. And they were taken over by members of the Third Reich, and they took their wealth, and they basically had to come with the clothes on their back. So they came over with in many cases, I'm not trying to flatten it completely out, but the spirit of it is they were escaping one thing, and they came with the idea that all we have is us, because America, even though they allowed them in, they weren't like openly embracing them with the same level of warmth that they would Western, European immigrants they would do from, the Scandinavian countries or from, Western Europe or whatever. They were seen as something other than that. So they only had each other on one level. But like many immigrants, whether it be African today or, Asian or whatever, they come with a goal in mind. Like, I'm coming here to reap the opportunity that is available here, right? So I'm leaving my home and I'm going to a new place, not to somehow get my rights. They don't come here with an idea that and again, I'm being a little bit general, but they don't come here with the idea, like many immigrants, to say, I'm here because I want to live, get the rights that I'm due. They're coming to say, how can I reap the advantages of living in this culture where if you can just put something together, you can figure it out. Then you bring all your cultural whatever, and you build communities. You do all that stuff. Here's the thing that's different about our history, right? Their version of success is to build something from scratch without necessarily having all the rights and benefits that people who've lived here have had. It seems to me that our definition of success, having come through oppression in the land which our ancestors have been in since we were slaves, right, is to somehow appropriate the rights that were denied us so that we can then take that platform to then expand and go forward. First, we get the rights, and then we can somehow appropriate the accoutrement of success, whether that be material or whatever, as opposed to saying, as a group, at least in the modern times, you think about the civil rights era or whatever, what was happening was that there was an active and forced keeping down of Black people. And what we were trying to do is get that lifted off, just get it lifted off so that we can assimilate. So we can come out of our communities, which have been held down, and somehow be able to move across town or be able to go here, go there, as opposed to saying, now let's build up our communities. Our definition of success has been to how can we assimilate, right? So I guess what I'm saying is that maybe our perspective should be, as opposed to how to better assimilate, which is still good, because it's not like other groups don't assimilate into the American experience, but they never abandoned to your point, Ron, they never abandoned, and even Darren, the community aspect of having our own thing, because we're going to be able to rely on each other more acutely than we can rely on the government or other things. And we can build up enough wealth and influence within our own sphere, then we'll have a better opportunity to send our kids to the best schools and then become part of this bigger experiment where we now have even more influence because we're running many of the levers that affect all of society.
Well, I disagree, and here's why. I think our approach now is survival. When you look at Tulsa, we did that, and they burned it down. time and time again, when we did that, they destroyed it. So after a while, you start to say, if we build it, they will destroy it. So we can't get to building community and culture and wealth because they will destroy it or take it away from us.
Do you really believe that?
I really do. I really do. Because when you think about what they did in Tulsa and a number of other communities across the country, even here in Los Angeles, when they put the 10 freeway through the black wealthy neighborhoods, when we do that, they destroy it. So over time, you learn the lesson. You learn you learn the lessons about what they will do to your community. And I think every time that we have had success, when you look at West Adams area, you look at all that, they actually put a freeway through our community. They did it in Detroit as well. We had black middle class where we owned property. We owned our own business.
Altadena. We know.
We have had those, but unlike the other communities, there's not a destruction that happens to those communities here in the United States. And so after a while where you start to see that, if you are black and you are successful, you want to keep your head down. You don't want to disrupt things. I do that at work. I'm extraordinarily successful in my career, but I keep my head down. I don't, I'm not trying to do anything that will cause them to turn on me. And I think in our communities, we have been victimized so many times by trying to improve ourselves. We had 5 black banks here in Los Angeles. We've got 1 now. We start to see this pattern of destruction that happens from the greater society. And, over time, you start to go, I just can't anymore. I can't go through that heartache again.
Ron, you got more to say on that?
Yeah, Darren, the term you're looking for is cultural trauma. That's the term where there are certain events in our past: slavery, Jim Crow, redlining, the lack of GI Bills for returning vets. Totally get it. Yeah, totally get that. The problem is when you acknowledge that there's trauma, you become conscious that this is something that is mental and emotional that I am dealing with. You mentioned Tulsa, which was over 100 years ago. You're not mentioning Oprah Winfrey Network. You're not mentioning BET. So we have plenty of examples of large companies. Robert Johnson, he wasn't the first billionaire. Reginald Lewis was. But there are plenty of examples that are not being heralded as success stories in this country. And I think and that's why I asked you, do you really believe that? Because I think it is a trauma that if we continue to hold on to it, it's going to hold us back. It's not the man holding us back. It's our own belief that we can't be successful. And these other cultures do not suffer from that trauma. And that's purely self-induced.
But they were not also victimized like we were. And so they don't suffer from that trauma because they were not victimized in the same way that we are. And yes, that's true. We do have examples of, wealthy. We talked about, Kobe Bryant, and, there are examples. And oftentimes, this time it sounds like you in the house, Ron. They point to the 1 or 2 success and say, see, if you really tried, that's what you could become. But when you look at redlining, you look at school systems, you look at the injustices and the inequities that are inflicted upon our community, that there is a cultural trauma, yes. And there are also real world obstacles that don't allow us to achieve at the same rate. I have a number of kids that I mentor that did everything they were supposed to do. They went to school every day. They got A's in their calculus class. But when they get to university, they aren't successful in their calculus class because their class didn't have the same academic rigor as the kids that are there at the university now. They did everything right, and they're struggling. And so these obstacles, it's more than just a notion. These obstacles are real for a lot of folks in our community. and the trauma is real. We talked about The Wire in the last episode. A lot of the things that kids have to deal with, it's just real world. I remember one teacher sending me a text because he was crying during an AP exam because one of his students had gotten murdered the day before, and the kids still had to come and take the AP exam. And so he's like, I'm sitting here watching these kids take this exam, knowing that their friend was murdered yesterday. And it was just trauma. Like, all those kids still had, they're going to have to compete with the kids from the private schools, the affluent schools. So there is a cultural trauma that is real. And I think we don't have the institutions that we once had in our community to help deal with that trauma. The churches aren't the same. The community centers aren't the same. The things that we had, like, we were very fortunate, I think, at SC. We all sort of came together at the same time, and we created our own community. Like, we made it. We built it from scratch because we were like, we all are here at the same time, and we suffered through, all of the inequities and the injustice. We suffered through that together. We built our own community because there were people who were there before, but we all came together at a certain time. But I think for our communities, it's just a struggle.
I think there's a good amount of unlearning and as well as learning, because I think there's enough trauma to go around. There's certainly trauma in the Jewish community. There's trauma in many communities and so forth. But my observation is that it goes back to a cultural dynamic that existed even before the Holocaust. Jews lived in community with one another, typically. Right. And so they had that muscle memory of like what that means to do business with one another, to educate yourself in a certain way, to take advantage of certain opportunities, to do all the things that allow you to build an infrastructure that actually made them formidable against the power structure or whatever. Not that Jews were going to take over Germany or whatever, but they became affluent enough as a general community that the political class, meaning Hitler and those people who were looking for a scapegoat that would have real resonance with their community, they could say, look at those people, you're having a hard time, they're doing really well, let's go after them, because if you just do it to them, you'll get all the spoils that you deserve. And so they come out of that situation and coming to America, where many of them had unbelievable trauma, whether they were actually in concentration camps, right, or they were the survivors of people who had lost their lives there. They had unbelievable trauma. Now, we're generations removed from that now, but the thing that remains is that idea that, we have to always remember who we are. Right? Remember where we come from. Remember our institutions. Remember all those things. We as a community seem to be trying to forget those things. We're trying to not use those things as a springboard, even in the midst of the time where the America has never fully let its foot off our necks. To your point, Darren. Never fully let it, even to this very day. Now they're trying to ban certain books. Maybe, Ron, one day the book that you recommend will be on the banned list where kids, should they want to check it out from the local library or from their school library, whatever, like that historical perspective, where now to say that, America's done really some things really great, and they've been horribly, almost demonic in their treatment of their own citizens. That's seen as being woke. Like you can't somehow celebrate America yet hold America up for self-examination without now it seeming to be woke. So my point is that I think that we as a community have to reevaluate what our definition of success is. And to Darren's point, I know that oftentimes, when we've had those examples of success, they've been seen as a threat and done away with. But I don't think I don't think that reality would exist today if there was an ethic that said, hey, let's try and do this. There will be people who say, hey, that's reverse discrimination if you want to, do something for your own or whatever. But, I think there is a way. Ron, what were you going to say?
I was waiting for Darren to raise Puff Daddy as an example of the system
Puff
oppressing the black.
Daddy, Bill Cosby.
Yeah, exactly. I should be able to do immoral, illegal activities and get away with it because I'm black, and if you don't let me, then it's racism. No, I mean, I think that the challenge I have with Darren's line of thinking is Darren's belief is that individuals don't have agency over their life because at some point they will run into the ceiling of racism and they will get turned away, and therefore they will just tumble into despair. And if you accept that premise, it limits your upside. It limits what we teach our children. It limits what we can do at work with our investments. And the Larry Holmes said, if you got enough green, I ain't black. I got enough green, so I'm not black. It's an exaggeration, but this country's about money and the accumulation of wealth and being able to help your family, help your friends, help your community. It's all driven by the acquisition of wealth. You can be a social justice warrior and picket all you want. You're not going to change things as much as you will if you put a whole bunch of money down on a congressional candidate or senatorial candidate. And so I just really kind of, it's frustrating to hear this again. It is the African American traumatic narrative that is an excuse for me not to double down on delayed gratification, not to double down on education, not to double down on the things that I can control to get me and my family a different story arc than the one that I was born into.
Well, see, I think you misunderstand my perspective. And I'll kind of give it to you from the way my mom told me. She said, you are black, you are male, they are racist. They will do everything in their power to stop you. Anything that you do that is successful, they will try to take away from you. Knowing all of that, what are you going to do to succeed? Because what she did is she set the table saying, this is what you're up against. My expectation is that you're going to overcome those things. My expectation is you will have to work 4 times as hard to get, I think you mentioned this in the last time,
Yes.
half as far. She said that's the expectation. She was never saying that it was an excuse. She was always saying that these are the things that you're going to face. And what I am saying is until we start having those conversations with people so that they can be ready. When my kids run into issues, they're heartbroken. They're like, oh my God, I can't believe I was passed over, like your mentee in the other episode. I can't believe I was this. I can't believe I was that. And my response to it has been, all right, I'm just going to keep rolling, because I was raised in a different, and unfortunately for my kids is I try to smooth the road a little bit for them. And I think I did too much. And I think I tried to take down some of those barriers for them. So now when they're on their own and they run up against, things that they weren't expecting, they don't have the tools to fight back. And it's a struggle that I've had, my entire life. I grew up in a certain neighborhood in a certain way, and I've always had to fight. My kids, not so much. They're middle class. They never missed a meal. They never had the light shut off. None, all that. So they don't really have that. And I think in our community, we don't talk enough about the pain. We don't talk enough about that in the context of, which means that you got to fight on. Which means, I don't think we do that. And I think that's where what I'm saying is the trauma, all the things that you're saying, all of that, we've been victims, all that. You have to accept that as a reality and that you are dealing with that. I think they call it now trauma-informed education. And you have to accept that so that you can be ready for it and be ready to combat it. That's what I'm saying. I'm not saying it's an excuse, but yeah, you have to do all that. Yeah, you may have to study harder than your classmates. I don't remember, Ron, if you remember when we were in school, it was always like, and I say this, culturally, contextually at the time, we would say this. It's not something we believe. The Asians got all the answer keys. We used to say that.
Oh, I didn't say that. I said the frat boys do.
Yeah. Well, we in the engineering school, the Asian had all the answer keys.
Okay.
And I still had to study. It didn't matter what advantages they had. I still had to study. And I think both things can be true. I think you can talk about that. And I think what I'm saying is our collective trauma needs to be a learning. And then lastly, I'll close with I had to have my daughter watch Eyes on the Prize when she was in high school because she didn't understand what we have been through. Because she was whining about something. And I was like, do you know who we are? So I had her watch Eyes on the Prize, and she was fascinated by the Montgomery bus boycott. She's like, all those people for over a year did that? So I had to give her that context in order for her to understand. That's what I'm saying.
Okay. I think the challenge, again, I'm still troubled by your thought process on this. It's not, and there's no shade. It's just that, yes, it's okay to talk about the first paragraph, which is here's the history of racism. We've all taught our kids 3 times harder. Completely understand. And that's unfair. But you know what else is also unfair? What also is unfair is that each of our daughters can take the SAT multiple times and know that the second time you take the SAT, you on average get a 10% higher score. What also is unfair is that you can take AP classes and that your school has AP classes and that you can take a test for $85. And if you get a 3 or 4 or 5, it usually translates into college credit. Okay. So when I add up the fact that our kids took 8 APs and the other took 7 APs times $85 plus the cost of SATs plus prep, it's unfair that people of means have an advantage no matter where you're from, whether it's West Baltimore or Appalachia. And I think that's the message that should resonate louder, that it's unfair, but the unfairness is economic. That's where the real insidious truth is that the people in the very top, they just want all of us fighting for small crumbs. Okay. The best thing that plantation owners in this country ever did, or the smartest thing they ever did, is they allowed indentured servants who were white to be able to buy off their time and become free men. Whereas if you were of African descent, you were not allowed to buy your contract out. So basically it created the first fissure of we're not equal. Your whiteness allows you better privilege than your blackness. Even though you're both slaves and we both think y'all are like the bottom of the barrel, we're going to create this perception that race matters. And I just think that teaching our kids, whatever your color, yes, you have to work 3 times harder. I'm sorry you weren't born into Beverly Hills, but now that you're here, this is the game, hustle, and let's make some money here, because that's what you got to do.
Yeah, but you and I have a similar background. Let me just get this quick. You and I have a similar background, right, Ron? We were both street kids. We weren't middle class growing up.
Nope.
How many times did you get stopped by USC security? There is a other aspect of it. I still hold the record of getting stopped by security 23 times for, sometimes it was with my do-rag, sometimes it was being in class doing nothing. Sometimes it was me just riding my bike through campus. And so there's another aspect to it as well that is racial.
All right. So you're gonna open that door now, right?
Go ahead, Dick. Go ahead.
So listen, I think that if I were to sum up what I've heard from all 3 of us, racism is real. Is there anyone who would deny that? Both then and now, racism is real. Ron, you agree?
Yep.
Okay. 2, that despite racism, it's your job and your job alone, each individual, to overcome that racism and pursue the life that you want. Yes?
Yes.
Okay. So having said those 2 things, which are both true, I would agree with those things as well. Everybody, and we'll go from Ron to Ron, to Darren, and then I'll be the last one. One thing that you think would make a profound difference for Black people in America if we were able to do one thing at scale or whatever, because what we're talking about is not, in my view, how individuals can win. That's the reason why I think America is in the spot it's in general, is that we don't have a sense of collective purpose and responsibility. So the goal has to be to make a collective improvement. What would your suggestion be to collectively improve the plight of Black people? One thing. May not be the only thing, but the one thing that you think would be important.
I'm going to show that I am out of touch. But I'm going to connect it back to the book and the triple package and the three markers for success. The third one was impulse control. And I would say, and there's a lot of impulse control opportunities, but connecting this in a financial way, I would say if we could increase the Black savings rate and then invest that money in Black-owned banks and Black financial management firms, and they competed as well or exceeded the returns of their counterparts, I think that would be a virtuous cycle that would create more investment, more people saving, and creating a culture of delayed gratification and saving for the future and investing for the future.
Fair. Darren.
Did you see the movie District 9? It was a movie came out a couple of years back. It was a foreign film about aliens that had come.
I did see that.
There was one scene and they were in a slum, and this white woman comes and she asks this African, they're actually in a shanty. It's just built with, and she says, I noticed that all of you all have flat screens TVs or something along that lines. I don't understand, with all this poverty, why do you all have flat screen TVs? And he said, because if that's just a window there, I see the reality of what I live in. If there's a TV there, I see the fantasy of what I could live in. And to quote Grandmaster Flash, what you watch on TV tells what the world is supposed to be. But when I look outside, the only thing I see is the poverty-stricken reality. I think the thing that we can do to help the Black community is we need to school our community on who we are, who we actually are. The Lewis Latimers, the Ida B. Wells, the Robert Johnsons, the Carter, the peanut guy, George Washington Carver, not just Malcolm and Martin and the civil rights, not even just Kwame Ture or any of that. I think if we had community schools or community locations where we taught our history, because I think that is what will change a mindset. Because if all you see about your culture is on social media and mainstream media or entertainment, or if that's all you see, that's all you know. When I first went into teaching, I remember I worked on the corner of Denker and Western, like right blocks away from when the 92 riots started off. And it was on the corner. There were 5 major gangs in that area. And I went from being an engineer on a Friday to a teacher on a Monday. And no one ever messed with me, never messed with my car. No, I was never harassed or anything. And I asked someone once, why is that? And they said, you're under everybody's protection. I was like, really? Why? You're the first Black engineer that anyone has ever seen. All of these gangs here have agreed that you can't be touched. And I'm talking about these notorious gangs. They just decided that they weren't going to hurt me. Because I didn't know any better. I'm from Detroit. I was like, y'all ghettos out here look like penthouses to me. So I didn't know I was in a bad neighborhood, because y'all bad neighborhoods, it's still LA, right? Y'all still got palm trees. You got palm trees and nice house. Like, so where I'm from, bad neighborhoods look bad. It looks awful. I mean, it looks like a war zone. But out here, it's I remember one of our buddies was laughing when I was looking for after I got kicked out of the dorms. I was looking for a place, and I told him where I was living. He's like, dude, those are the projects. I'm like, man, those are condos. so, if we can bring about an understanding of who we are and how far we've come and the cultural context, I think that when you start to see that there were Black people who were wealthy during, Jim Crow, that there were Black people who were able, I think that will help people get a mindset of it's not just athletics or entertainment. When you look at Lewis Latimer, the engineer that helped both Edison and Bell, when you start looking at all those things, I think really getting into our own community and culture, I think that will set the plate and set the table for people to be able to save. Because if you don't have any context for why I should save, because I'm gonna, everybody in my neighborhood has been here for generations and we all poor. If you don't have context for that, if you can't see outside of that, I think anything that we do won't even last a generation.
But Darren, let me just push back gently. Let's say you snap your finger and 22 million Black folks, or however many are in this country, have the collective wisdom and enlightenment of everything that's been done both in this country and in Africa. What behaviors are you expecting to change?
I think what happens is when you see what you're capable of, when someone changes the narrative of your history, changes the narrative of your culture, then you can see things differently and you can expect more things of yourself. If you have been taught, because you remember, even with us, we grew up with blaxploitation. We was happy to Sanford and Son. We're like, oh, look at that, we got Black people on TV. But fortunately for us, we were still close enough to the civil rights movement where we knew stuff. Like Stokely Carmichael came to SC and spoke. We were close enough to the civil rights movement.
No, he didn't actually.
I saw him. He was there. His name was Kwame Ture at the time. Yeah, he was there.
No, because we voted on him.
No. This is before. This is me, Maria, and Greg going to see him over at the Hancock. I mean, we saw him. This is before.
Okay,
this is my sophomore year. This is before I got into politics.
I was going to say this isn't way inside baseball, but you and I were on the BSA when he came in
the second time. They didn't want him back,
and wanted a big check that would be about the equivalent of like $500,000.
Yeah, that was the second guy. That's when he already gotten on the circuit. He had come years before. Okay, but what I'm saying is, we were close enough to the civil rights movement to where we understood our history. Yeah. We remember, Jesse Jackson, like, I am. I mean, I still get choked up when I hear those videos. I am somebody, I may be poor. I am. We had that. And that Darren, carried us.
I think you're right. And it actually references.
Can you replay that part again, Nick?
You're right.
You're right.
Watch how it all comes back to me. You're right. And it references the first characteristic of the triple package, which is a superiority complex.
Yeah.
You have to believe that your culture is preeminent, and then still be insecure to work hard. But you have to believe that you have a superiority complex.
And I think your three packages in that order for a reason. I think we're missing that. We may have the second one, we're insecure, but I think we are missing that. My mom used to tell me not to compete with other people because I'd be bringing myself down to their level. Yep. So, one of the things that I was talking about why I came to SC, and I know we're running a little bit long, is, being from Detroit, I used to have my own theme song. I would walk down the hallway singing my own theme song, and people would say, "You think you're better than everybody?" And I would go, "Why, yes." And so I do. And so, Detroit, was very salt of the earth. SC was like, we're better than everybody. We are this. And this is during the 80s when we weren't, but we said we were.
Yes.
And that resonated with me because, like, I am better than everybody else. I'm smarter than everybody. That superiority complex. It didn't matter that there were folks that had more money. It didn't matter that folks were smarter. It didn't matter they had better education. I really believe that SC attitude that I'm better than you. And if 100%. you need to show me that you're better than me, and you might win, but I fight on. That became like my whole mantra. And that's why I love SC so much, because it gave me a home that I didn't have growing up, because my mom taught me that you're better than everybody else.
despite the campus police stopping you. Try and stop this man today. Try and stop him today. So,
well, I wear a shirt and tie to campus every day, and so they're not stopping me.
You probably could have wore a shirt and tie back then, and they probably still would have stopped you. It was a different time,
It was
but I resonate.
Days.
Yeah, I resonate with both of you guys said. I mean, the cruel reality of life in America is that, no money, no say, right? You get nowhere without money. And that's just the sad reality of it, sad or whatever you want to call it. And then at the same time, without having a sense of self, a bigger why, which I think gets down to Darren's point about having a sense of greater identity for yourself, gives you that why that would make you want to go out and pursue those things that might bring wealth, right? You can't do it if you have a inferiority complex, or you just don't have a greater sense of beyond yourself, a lineage, a inheritance that you deserve to forward. Like, it's your mission, it's your job to forward that inheritance that you've been given. So I get that. I'll just offer this as my last pillar that I would suggest, keeping in mind what you guys said, and that is family. It used to be a conservative talking point, or it's always been a conservative talking point that, Black people, Black men, you're not in the home and you guys have family, breakdown. And if you just, had better families, you be better off. Well, actually, I do believe that there's some truth to that. I think there's some truth, not to the idea that there's something wrong with us, that we inherently, don't like to create families. But I do believe there has been from external factors that have caused internal factors, and particularly in the social media age, where many people are eschewing doing families for both economic reasons and so forth. But particularly for us, I believe that the idea of community starts on the micro, that you're used to being in family units, and that is something to be apprised and to be pursued. And that from that family unit, not necessarily having great wealth, but you start to connect on a bigger community level that would draw the two things that you guys already discussed, one being economic and the other being, social and identification wise. They create that environment that will be rich for that. So I think if we just took those three pillars and prioritized them in some way, I think we'd be on our way to kind of creating the opportunities for ourselves collectively that others have shown that they've enjoyed. So that was a great discussion, guys. I really I got something out of that. I really felt like that's something I wanted to put out there, and you guys delivered for sure. So before we get out of here, I'll just leave you guys with my parting question. So I started this one with a question about, what can we learn from Jewish people? We just recently passed the 100 days in office of Donald Trump, and there's been a lot of discussion about that, and a lot of analysis. But my question to you guys is, and he's not the first president. Obviously, the first 100 days, in office has been a benchmark for most presidents of the modern age. You guys have an understanding about where that concept of the first 100 days came from?
I heard something on one of the news broadcasts this week. So do you want me to share it, or do you want to have a big reveal?
No. If you have an understanding, let me know.
I don't know. I don't know if it's true or not. I didn't even look it up. They said it started with FDR, his first 100 days because of the New Deal or something like that. I didn't really pay much attention to it, but that's what I heard this week.
Okay, cool. Got you. Ryan?
I mean, I don't know the origin. I know in the corporate space, people always talk about your first 90 days and your 90-day plan. But I don't know where the number 100 came from.
Got it. Well, Darren, you are definitely on the right track, right? So when FDR came into office, we were just coming into a major economic depression, right, in the United States. And so one of his aides or someone in his administration came up and said, hey, if you don't basically fix this, you're going to go down as one of the worst presidents of all time. And so the story goes, FDR says, if we don't find a way out of this and we don't succeed, I may be the last American president, right?
Mm.
And so they got to work, like trying to pass as many things they could to kind of deal with this onslaught of the economic problem that was going down. But in addition to that, the 100 days wasn't necessarily even a measurement of his term in office. What FDR did, and this is something I just learned from a recent story or NPR story, somewhere I was listening to it, that he called back Congress. Congress was at recess, and he called back Congress because he needed to get things passed by Congress. It wasn't all by executive orders and stuff. He wanted to get certain things passed by Congress. And so he called them back in the first 100 days of their session. Their session in office was this period where so many things happened. And then that idea of a president starting off fast, and like you get a certain amount of like leeway with the American people, and you're new in office, and that first 100 days will somehow indicate how successful you may be over the next 4 years. So that tradition kind of carried forward, but that's not actually where it came from.
Oh, okay.
I was listening to a podcast. You know what? I didn't clip it out, so you're gonna have to take my word for it. I'm gonna put it in the show notes. I'm not gonna run it here because I don't have it ready. But this is what draws us to the Trump administration. The first 100 days dates back to Napoleon. Napoleon had been, if you guys know about the history of his whole history, he had been emperor, and then he was overthrown and he was exiled to the Isle of Elba, right, where he was supposed to basically live in seclusion. But he found out a way to escape. He escaped the Isle of Elba, and he came back to Europe, and he mounted an army. He mounted an army to basically try and reestablish the dominance that he had. And over the 100 days that he marched his way to Waterloo, over that 100 days, he grew his army exponentially until he got to Waterloo. And we all know what happened at Waterloo with Napoleon when he came up against the Allied forces that came against him. That was where he was basically ultimately defeated in that 100 days hence from his exile. And he was defeated, and he was sent to, I forget where the isle was, where he ended up dying and ultimately in exile. That's where that 100-day period where the great leader is on a mission to do a certain thing actually started, and it kind of got transposed more than 100 years later to when we were in the modern presidential age. And so we see that Trump just recently passed his 100 days, and we see what carnage he has wrought, and we'll see whether the Napoleon example or the FDR example, when it relates to the ultimate outcome of that 100 days, where it leads our country or him as a president. So I thought that was interesting. I'll leave the clip in the show notes so you can see.
That is interesting.
So anyway, thought that was an interesting little aside to bring it full circle. So guys, we're about an hour in. That may be one of our longest ones yet, but hopefully you guys at home got something out of it. We truly appreciate you checking us out and liking and subscribing, sharing it with other people particularly, and leaving comments, because it just helps us to see if what we're talking about is at all relevant to you and your lives. And we hope it is. So we'll be back again on the next one. And until then, we appreciate it. Guys, I always enjoy hanging with you. And
likewise.
We'll do it again soon. All right, guys. We'll see you next time.